So welcome and thank you for watching. My name is Haylette Bertrand and I work for the Institute for Futures Research at the University of Stellenbosch Business School. And as you know, or as you might know, the 9th of August is usually Women's Day in South Africa, and August is known as Women's Month. So in the light of this, we at the IFR thought it would be great to celebrate women by spotlighting the great work that is being done by some remarkable women in the field of futures thinking and futures research. Therefore, I want to thank the following women who are joining us today. Prof Sirkka Heinonen, all the way from Finland. Thank you very much for your time. Dr. Njeri Mwagiru, Sabine Lehmann, and Janine now. Thank you, ladies, for joining me today and for being willing to talk to us and just share with us how you've come into this field. So I think to start off, let's let you introduce yourself and maybe share just how your path came across futures thinking and futures research. And if I may, Janine, can you start for us?
Sure. So thank you very much for the invite, Haylette. I'm Janine Nell. I'm part of the Teach the Future movement, which is a global movement. The futures field came to me, I regret, rather later in life. I would have loved this to have happened much earlier. I was always involved in communication and marketing and strategy work. But there was always something missing for me. Strategy always seemed to be a bit of an extrapolation of what's currently happening. And then I was introduced to this field of futures. I enrolled at the University of Stellenbosch Business School in the postgraduate diploma course, which was a year. I think I was only about 2 or 3 months into it when I knew I couldn't just leave it there. I needed more. So I then followed that up with a master's, which I completed. And quite coincidentally, it was a discussion with my niece about women's rights that made me realize that I don't really understand this young generation Z and what they're thinking and why on earth they're thinking what they do. So I ended up focusing a lot of my research in my MPhil on the youth and the challenges that they face. And when it came time to do my master's, Sirkka, you might be interested to know, I found an article written by one of your master students on, I think the short title was Nomads, was the future perceptions, hopes and fears of young students in Finland. And I made contact with the student and I said, well, the value of research is in replication of a study. And let's do this in South Africa. And I did that for South Africa. And it gave me incredible insights into what's going on in the minds of South African youth. And through that whole process, I got in touch with Professor Bishop in the US and realized that unless we do something for the youth of South Africa and Africa, we're going to end up in a couple of decades with 1.2 billion young people without the skills or knowledge about how to navigate their way through the 21st century and the world. So yes, and that's how this journey currently is and where it is.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Janine. And I think also I'd like to encourage people to go and Google Teach the Future and Teach the Future South Africa, because they're doing great work. And it is something that the children can start doing. I don't know when last you ask children to tell you about what they think the future holds, but I think we can learn from them. So great work that you guys are doing. So next up, Njeri, if I can ask you to share. Njeri is also one of my colleagues at the Institute for Futures Research. So Njeri, over to you.
Thanks, Haylette. And it's such a pleasure to be joined here by all of these amazing and remarkable women. I'm really pleased to be counted with this bunch. And so, yes, I am the senior futurist currently at the Institute for Futures Research based at the University of Stellenbosch Business School. And I'm currently leading the African Futures portfolio. So my story of how I came into the futures field has got 2 levels. I think practically speaking, I was in executive education and I was running short international programs. And part of one of the sessions we were organizing for a UN leaders group, we invited the director of the IFR, Dr. Mostert, to present. And so through that network, as opportunity would have it, and level of preparedness, I suppose, I came to be at the IFR. So that's that one story. And then my interest in futures, I think, has been quite long term. I came in through the practitioner's angle, definitely, and executive education. But my interest in the field and in sort of strategic foresight and thinking about the long term in a focused way has really come from my background. I have a background in education, knowledge, and learning, as well as in development, change, and transformation, both at sort of at personal levels, also organizational level. My PhD focused at the organizational level, and very interested also at sort of systems level. My master's was in international relations, and then I'm very passionate about the continent as well. So I've always been fascinated with where we find ourselves, because we continue to negotiate positioning in sort of international geopolitical, socio-economic context. We struggle a lot with with our history and our past and those narratives. And we continue to negotiate, our development trajectories. We continue to negotiate where we want to be, who we want to be, and how to achieve that. So I was really in search, especially during my PhD studies, of an approach that would facilitate the meeting of minds in a way that would also think in a non-linear way. So to think around alternatives, because so much of how we engage with the continent is very predetermined, very deterministic. And I was looking for something that would allow us to think across a broad spectrum of options. And I came across, the work of, Peter Senge and some of his work on learning organization, systems change, Otto Schwammer, and I was hooked. And then practically, Clem Santa and the scenario building work he was doing, and the South African Montfleur scenarios as well. I thought, yes, this is an approach that would allow us to think in broad ways around possibilities and opportunities for the continent's expansion, growth, and transformation, and also for us to to take that conversation through to organizational level in business context, through to community level, and through to personal level, in terms of how we ourselves identify, as citizens of the African continent, but also as citizens of a global context. So my interest in futures is really deep-rooted in my passion for change and transformation, and particularly I came into it through executive education and engaging leaders, particularly in the international community, around development issues, policy implementation.
Great, thanks, Njeri. And it's great to hear your passion for the continent. And I think what excited me when I was doing my MPhil was also Peter Senge and the way that you can just think differently around the future. I mean, it changed my whole life. And then also, I think the other beauty, before I introduce Prof Sirkka, is just that there's multiple plausible futures and multiple possible futures. And there isn't necessarily a right or a wrong, because no one knows what the future is. But if we prepared and if we take time to think about the future, it makes our decisions now so much easier. So on that note, Prof Sirkka Heinonen, I'd like to introduce you and also ask you to share how you got involved. And you've been involved for a very long time. You're also involved with the Club of Rome, which we very respect. And we're also very fortunate to have a good relationship with the Finland Futures Research Institute as well. So over to you.
Thank you, Heine, very much for this invitation to join this program and discuss with you. And yes, indeed, I started my futures studies career a long time ago, already 40 years ago. And the story goes so that I just had graduated Masters of Art from Helsinki University, and I was looking for a job. So I was not necessarily looking for a job in future studies, because it was the time exactly when future studies was just launched into Finland. And there was a position at VTT, which is Technical Research Center of Finland, government research center, and they started a very big future studies program, and I was hired there as a researcher and taking care of international relations to other countries doing future studies. So that's the starting point for future studies career for me, but very eye-opening, because my training, being a humanist with a dash of political studies, I had to jump into technology foresight. And it was very fruitful, because I want to emphasize the impacts of technology on humans, on cities, on countries, on society at large. So I was working there as a futures researcher, so very interesting position. But then 2007, I was invited to become a professor at Finland Futures Research Center, because we have in Finland not only research, but also government level. We have government foresight in parliament. We have a committee for the future, and we have this academic futures research unit inside University of Turku. And it has been a pleasure to cooperate with Stellenbosch University with your unit. And in this Finland Futures Research Center as a professor, my job was to teach, conduct research, but also help companies, governments. And now I'm Professor Emerita. That means that I'm not so much teaching in the programs. We have a master's program and doctoral program, but I concentrate on supervising our doctoral students. And it so happens I have currently 7 doctoral students. And next week on Thursday, one of the students, a woman, Sophie Kurki, who is also employed at FFRC, will defend her doctoral dissertation. So if you are willing to watch it, I can send you the link. It's about corporate foresight and transformation. So exactly these 2 platforms where I have conducted my career as future studies, VTT, Technical Research Center, and in this academic unit. And highlight, as you mentioned, very important Club of Rome activities, and also Millennium Project activities are very important for me to follow. So I take this kind of international perspective on the field.
Well, thank you very much. And I think for us, it's so encouraging to hear what Finland is doing from a government perspective with regards to foresight and the importance of strategic foresight. I think we can learn a lot from just seeing what you are doing with regards to that, and just sharing that message of, you know, how that can help a country and a continent as a whole. But on that note, I want to ask Sabine if you could share with us your journey. I know it's got a nice creative spin to it, so we look forward to hearing your story.
Hi everybody, great to see you all. And Sirkka, I'm always so jealous when I hear how Finland as a society integrates futures thinking at all levels. Oh my word. So my journey into futures thinking, on the one hand, I think it's my personality. I've always been curious, which is why I've called my my consulting business Curiositas, which is Latin for curious. Just interested in a whole lot of things. And a little aside, I did a mindfulness course about 4 years ago, and I was lying there, you know, meditating for half an hour, whatever it is. And the teacher said, you know, and don't worry about things in the past and let go of the past. And I was like, I thought to myself, I never think about the past. It just doesn't, I always seem to think about the future. It just was just a thought. So those 2 things, my curiosity and my natural interest in future-y kind of stuff, and I've got a very eclectic, broad interest in many things, meant that when I hit kind of a midlife crisis in a way, in my late 40s, I'd already done some studies early in my 20s. I actually studied speech and hearing therapy. I then went in logopedics. I then went into tourism and was the CEO of Table Mountain Cableway and the chief operating officer of the Zuid-Mocha, the Museum of Contemporary Art Africa. And in between, I'd done an MBA. But I was kind of thought, you know, leading organizations, there's a lot of output. And I always say to my colleagues, you have to have input in order to give output. And so I thought, well, midlife crisis, I'm not going to train for the Comrades Marathon. I'm not going to, you know, travel around the world because I've got a husband that I want to stay at home with. What can I do that's just for me? There was no intention to change career, nothing at all. And this sort of meditative thought around, I'm always thinking about the future, my curiosity, my eclectic interest in many, many things. Google search, and up comes PG Dip, Stellenbosch University. which I did, and then I completed the master's degree. So in total, that's 3 years. I loved it. From the very first 2 weeks, I just absolutely love it. It totally spoke to me. And as I said, throughout the 2 years, it was only in the third year, then I thought, gosh, I wonder I could actually do this, find a way of doing this full time. I love it so much. So the initial intention was just a midlife crisis and to do something just for me with no intention of any expectation of what it could bring. And it was fantastic to come to Futures so open, actually. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful addition to my life.
Great. And I think the one thing that's standing out from all the people that I've spoken to is that Futures really sort of turn your world upside down, but in a positive way, because it opens up opportunities and it lets you see opportunities which you might not have seen before. It's a way of thinking that really goes along with it. So if I may, can I ask you anything that you're working on at the moment that maybe excites for you, that you want to share, that we can just get a bit more of a sense as to how this practically works? And if I can, let's start off with Janine again.
So COVID, obviously, I mean, if we were taught anything to help during this crisis, I mean, I was part of a small group looking at future scenarios of an industry just before COVID. And then literally a week later, all of our 10-year scenarios were fast-tracked by 10 years, and they were literally now relevant. It was incredible. It was good feedback at the time to know that we could think it, but somehow we always underestimate, and we're always still surprised at the extent that change is going to affect us. So one of the things we're working on at the moment, obviously Teach the Future is very big for us. We did quite a lot of workshops before COVID. We even went to the extent of training a whole lot of alumni as facilitators to help us facilitate workshops at schools and so forth. And then, of course, all shut down. So subsequent to that, we've realized that whether we start schools up again or whatever, we're still going to have to work and live in this digital world. So we've done a few online workshops for students on futures. And we've initially focused on the things that they were having difficulty with, like dealing with change, dealing with disruption, really just understanding the interconnectedness of the world, why they are being impacted, and what do we do with the disruption? Because disruption can be extremely positive as well. And I think that's the message that we're trying to, that's really important for us, is that we know that change is inbound, it happens to us. We don't have to be victims. We have power, we have agency. We can do something with what happens to us. But then the really exciting bit of Futures work for me is the outbound change. This is when we can purposely create the change and disruption in our worlds, create something to try and influence or create a preferred future. And this is what we are trying to, and I hesitate the word teach because it's not really teaching, it's facilitating a thinking process, the workshops. It's to have them understand their agency and their ability to make a difference in their world and to bring about outbound change. Because the young people are our future. And if they don't create the disruption and the change needed in society, whether that be on a value perspective, and for us, we're focusing a lot on social entrepreneurship as an output of the workshops, that they can look at their society empathetically and see where can I make a difference, and at the same time, perhaps create an income stream for myself and my family. So for me, that's exciting. I mean, it's always exciting for me to deal with young people, to see in their faces that moment when they realize, I can actually do something. So other than trying to work on some online programs, online learning, we're working with some exciting partners at the moment to take some of the material online so that learners can access it. As usual, being a non-profit, its funding is always our issue. So, and in South Africa, we have this double whammy of not just lack of infrastructure and access to smartphones, but data. Data is expensive. So we also have to try and source, obviously, some sort of funding for learners in the poorer communities that don't have access to data and that then are left behind, which is another tragic outcome and consequence of the COVID lockdown, is that it's just exacerbated our inequalities. And it's, if ever, these things were slightly hidden, they no longer are.
Absolutely, Janine. And I know that our director, Dr. Mostert, has actually made an appeal to say, if you want to donate anything, get data, get a way of donating data, if you can, a phone or anything, just to create that interconnectedness. And I think the other thing that I always realize when I talk to you guys is that the future is going to happen. You can let it happen to you, or you can actually take action and start projecting the future or decide for the future that we want. And that's really what the Institute also wants to portray. And that's, I think, what spoke to me personally, is that I have a choice. And I think that's what you guys are doing so well through Teach the Future, is to let the young people understand that they have a choice to create the future that they want. They don't have to have the future happen to them as it might have before. And that's beautiful.
Absolutely. And I mean, in terms of, if I can echo Njeri's sentiment, I mean, the future for me, I know technology will play a massive part in our lives. The future has never been more human than what we've realized now. It's about people. And for me, Africa is probably the biggest aspect of the future. We have massive market, massive opportunity. The number of young people in Africa now in the next couple of decades, it's a fantastic opportunity. And we need to help these young people make use of the opportunities and even help identify them, if that's what it takes. And I think the future is exciting, and the future is going to be bright for them.
Absolutely. And I think also the future doesn't have to be dystopian. I think Hollywood influences us so much in that way. We can actually, we can choose not to have that. But on that note, as we are passionate about Africa, Njeri, maybe you'd like to share just some of the work that you're doing, or anything that you've worked on before.
Yes, so the Institute for Futures Research actually has quite a number of projects ongoing, and I would say that's probably one of the bits of futures I enjoy the most, the continuous learning, because you bring a skill set to different industries, you bring a skill set to different clients, you bring a skill set to different individuals that want to think long-term about their own possibilities. And that allows you as a futurist to really get exposed to different fields of expertise. So currently at an industry level, we're working on the South African Platinum Group Metals Industry Roadmap, and facing a bit of a crisis in their industry because of the shift to green energy. And one of their key end users is fuel combustion engines. So and South Africa is I think the largest platinum producer globally. So to have a massive impact on the industry should there be this green shift that we are already seeing in terms of the trends. And I myself, I'm not, a geologist by training. I'm not really into the fuel industry, but I'm getting an opportunity to bring a set of, strategic foresight and long-term thinking and decision-making across broad options, to a very skilled group of individuals. So I really enjoy that about Futures. And the project that's very exciting is the African Governance Futures Project, I suppose now more at a public sector level. And we're looking into scenarios in Africa 2063, speaking to the 2063 Agenda 2063 vision of the African Union. And that's a very exciting project because we are trying to build online scenarios continent-wide, engaging a wide range of stakeholders and participants. And I'm really pleased that we're working closely with the FFRC and Sirkka and her colleagues on that project. So it's a great step within the regional policy space of the continent in terms of long-term thinking. So the African Governance Report will be coming out in 2021, and we're hoping to have some interesting scenarios looking at 4 different options for African futures, governance futures in 2063. A sort of best case scenario, a worst case scenario, a surprise case, or a wild card scenario, and the sort of baseline. So if we continue doing things as we're doing now, where might we be in the next 40 years? And the report will be tabled at hopefully the African Union General Assembly for the heads of states to consider. And we're hoping this will embed futures thinking at that national state level, and maybe we can see some progress and institutionalization of futures like in Finland. Fingers crossed.
Well, that sounds very exciting. I think if I just listen to you, the one thing that stands out for me about futures thinking is the curiosity that you need. You need to almost be curious about many things. And I I think that resonates very strongly with you, Sabina. And that's the beauty of futures thinking is you can go very specialist if you want to, but you can also learn about lots of things all the time and it never ends. So that's very exciting. But on that note, Prof Sirkka, is there anything you can share with us just to give us a taste as to what your life entails?
Okay, so about the pandemic, of course, there is a huge need of information and also some action plans. So very recently, this Committee for the Future in Parliament that I mentioned commissioned a few, let's say 10 experts to write reflections on the implications of the pandemic for Finland, both in the medium term and also in the longer term. So I was one of those writers, and it's at the moment in Finnish only, but it will be probably published in English as well. But it's really important to look further ahead into the future, even with the pandemic, because pandemic and COVID-19, it's a case of the VUCA world. And it's very good example for futures thinking, because in futures thinking, we have to accept the fact that risks, threats, uncertainties, they will not go away. Even actually there will be more of them, but it is our approach and our preparedness for them that matters. So it actually would be helpful for us to learn what to do when we know that these kind of new risks and surprises will happen, how to prepare ourselves, like not just futures thinking, not just future studies, but this kind of capacity, futures resilience, so that we will actually embrace the uncertainties and reflect them, not be frightened or paralyzed by them. So that was one, and not directly related with this committee work, but with the topic is that in Finland, we not only have this Committee for the Future in Parliament, also Finland Futures Research Center in University. Then we have a third institute, which is called Finnish Society for Future Studies. It's an NGO association for anyone interested in futures, consists of 700 members. And next week, we are having a webinar, and we are discussing this pandemic as well. But a new thing is that I want to push visualization of studies of futures images. So we had a very small call for videos, short films, and we got some entries about the daily life after pandemic, post-COVID world. So it's very interesting way to bring future and futures images to ordinary people through visualization. And another example I would like to mention, because science communication is important. We have a lot of very good futures research reports all over the world, but they are not read by decision makers because they are so complicated. We need more of these kind of popularized outputs, and one of them, the recent one, is this renewable energy project book, which was actually published in Cape Town last year in English, and this will be translated into Spanish as well. But the idea is to think about the urgency of energy transformation. So renewable energy is needed, and we also need citizen grassroots level activities, and these both combined will bring interesting results. And this is one of the most recent, very exciting work that I'm working on.
It does sound very exciting. And I think for me, the reality is that we need to come together more to discuss these kind of things. So I could see Sabina was jealous about the society and them coming together. And I think that's something that we need to encourage within our society in South Africa. Each of our, whenever we can, we really need to just start having these discussions, really making sense of the future, because in that way, it helps us also to change and to be more resilient and more prepared. So lastly, Sabina, from your side, anything that you'd like to share and examples that you can share about the work you do?
Yes, so my background for the last 25 years has been in the tourism industry, and specifically in visitor attractions. And again, if I go back to the name of my consultancy is Curiositas, which if we look towards tourism is curios that we brought back from our travels, curiosities that we have in our cabinet to look at and remind us of our travels. And then I talk about the fact that we want to bring curios from the future back to today to have a look at them to see what they might look like. So it's kind of how I've combined the two. In terms of sort of the area that I focus, it tends to be tourism, but also more leisure time, in terms of how is our time for leisure going to change? How is what we feel about leisure time, work versus work time, going to change? What are we going to do during that leisure time? And it was quite, my clients tend to be tourism organizations, whether they are provincial, government, or city organizations, some larger visitor attractions themselves. It was quite interesting, two interesting examples. One is I finished a report that was due to be released like on the 7th of March as part of a government tourism 2035 project. And they couldn't release it because COVID happened, it was going to be in person. And I then got a message to say, well, we need to rewrite the chapter on mega trends and the future. And I was like, well, okay, let me have a look. And I go and have a look and I said, no, this is all, we forecast 15 years from now, maybe you add a COVID word in on here, but collective anxiety, that's still a thing, if not more so. You know, safety in all its forms, etc. So that was quite interesting, as you mentioned, Janine, self-check, because of course the first thing you do is panic. So we can't withstand a 6-month disruptive change. And the other cool thing, I had an interesting client, a local client that you guys would all know quite well, but I can't say the name, where they came and wanted a facilitated workshop to talk about the future, particularly one big disruptor. And the CEO was quite afraid of this disruptor and didn't really want to engage with it. And although it was the topic, it was kind of like, well, that's too difficult, let's not talk about it. And we managed to look at this so-called collapse scenario and unpack it enough to realize, well, no, it's not necessarily collapse. There are many, you know, future scenarios, how this could play out. And we no longer need to be afraid about it. And what was interesting is that he'd collected a wide range of his staff in the room, not only senior people, and it was actually the junior, younger people who were less afraid of this scenario, because for them it was already in their world. It was a technology-driven collapse. So that was such a useful thing to see. And the other thing that happened was quite useful because of my time in the art world with Zaitsmoker, is I included a sort of a wild card person in the scenario, in the facilitation, which was an artist. No connection with tourism, futures or anything, just an artist. And he asked the most insightful questions or made the most interesting comments. At one stage he said, this is so irritating, your corporates are all the same. He says, I can't actually deal with this, and walked out the room. Walked out the room and said he's not actually coming back. But that in itself opened something up, because everyone realized we're having the same conversation again. And we called him back and said what was frustrating. You know what I mean? So it was a real lesson to me in how you can crack a nut. I mean, it was, yeah, it's not something you can always replicate, but the value of having a diverse range of voices and possibly someone who is a disruptor, an unintentional one, it's got to be authentic, was extremely valuable. And the client afterwards said that, you know, I don't know why I thought this is a collapse scenario. It's clearly just, you know, something we're going to have to deal with. And that was the big aha. So, yeah, I don't know if I've answered the question, but just so many exciting conversations that we have, and opportunities and things being opened.
Absolutely, and thank you, ladies, for your time. I think the one key thing is that we don't have to be afraid of the future, that we should think about the future, that we can choose to have the future in a way that works for us. And that's what excites me, is that you've got power in this. So please help us, those of you that are watching, to celebrate Women's Month by liking and sharing our video, and also subscribe to our channel for any future videos. We look forward to see more about Teach the Future, Janine. And Prof Sirkka, please share some of those videos that you'll be getting in about life after post-COVID. We'll gladly share it on our channel as well. So from my side, thank you very much. We'll see you soon.